The real moment that I would have to say where I really knew I wanted to be an actor, I was about 13, maybe 14 years old, and I was at the National Arts Center with my mother, and she was doing a production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And somewhere between the first and the second act, my mother no longer existed, and Virginia did. And to me, I thought that was the greatest magic trick I'd ever seen. I was really astonished by that. And I thought that was an incredibly powerful thing to be able to do to an audience, to a group of people in an effort to convey a story. That intrigued me probably more than anything. I'm not specifically looking for a role. I'm moved by a story. And that has served me well in the choices that I've made, and yet maybe not so well in some of the characters that I've played. An example of where that was difficult for me was in a film like Eye for an Eye. I loved the story that was being told. I felt it was incredibly current. It was dealing with people feeling that the judicial system in California was failing them. It was the height of the O.J. Simpson trial. Gang violence had hit an all-time high. And there was this growing sense that people should start taking things into their own hands, which I don't agree with. But this film dealt with all of those issues. So I really liked the story, and I really wanted to work with John Schlesinger. The cost for me, on the other end, was that I had to play kind of the most horrible character that I've ever played. And I didn't really fully realize the ramifications of that with regards to my career. Having said that, I'm moved by a story. And that story will usually impact me quite early in a script. And then I'll spend the rest of the script kind of praying that something doesn't happen that's going to take me out of it. Because once I start to get vested in that kind of a way, I already know it's something I want to do. The Gray Fox. The Gray Fox, and it was, I thought, well, that's actually not true. Sorry, The Gray Fox made a profound impression on me, and it was right before I had started doing a film called The Bay Boy. But I think Who Has Seen the Wind with Gordon Pinsent was the first Canadian film I'd ever seen, equally as beautiful, and both of those films had a barren quality to them. Obviously, Who Has Seen the Wind in the Prairie, in the middle of the Dust Bowl. And yet somehow I found it incredibly beautiful. And The Gray Fox, A Man in the Wilderness, kind of the older Jeremiah Johnson, if you will. I just thought it was an extraordinary, beautiful film as well. The whole thing, you have to remember, I was maybe 17 years old when I made that film. To be able to work with someone like Rob Reiner, who I knew from All in the Family, but he was a really famous guy in my eyes, and had just finished Spinal Tap, which was a film that I absolutely loved. Was a huge opportunity. But at that age, the second you kind of check into your hotel room or motel room, as it was then, put all your stuff away and you realize that you're paying for this and your parents aren't paying for this and this is your life, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any young person that doesn't say that's kind of the most exciting part of it, is that you actually you actually believe that your life is now beginning. And I have kind of an overwhelming sense of that when I think about Stand By Me. If it is something that you have to do, don't ever quit. When I take a look at an actor like Kevin Spacey, who I did a play with when I was 18 years old, Kevin Spacey didn't work for another 20 years. And I was friends with Kevin Spacey through that time. And to watch him stay with it and keep working, and to finally have that wonderful year when he had the top 3 films in the world at that time and won an Academy Award, he never gave up. And it taught me a lot about what you should be willing to pay or sacrifice in order to be an actor. And I have deep, deep respect for what I watched it cost him, and to any other actor. Just don't quit. Well, I wasn't part of the 80s Brat Pack. The 80s Brat Pack was a very specific article written by Vanity Fair about Emilio Estevez and the people that had done The Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire. And I think they included a few other people that grew up in Malibu, Sean Penn and Nick Cage. And I was spared the Brat Pack because I was from Toronto. In fact, I remember I was, just after Stand By Me, John Cusack and I were joking about how fortunate we felt at that time to be spared that. In the end, none of that ever really seemed to matter. The people that wanted to work kept working. Other people became directors, became producers, became writers from that time period. I got to make some of my favorite films, from The Lost Boys to Flatliners, the Young Guns pictures. To me, that was a wonderful time as well. Again, you're talking about a time frame of maybe between 18 and 25, 26 years old. At that time, to be able to work, you just felt incredibly fortunate. Canadian. Well, I would have to run in Canada, and I would be a member of the New Democratic Party. It would be complicated because the circumstances with which I become president is because of the death of another. So literally anyone from Johnson to Ford after Nixon resigned, they would understand the circumstances with which, one day you're vice president and all of a sudden the next day you're president. Those circumstances would apply to the character. With regards to presidents that I would be interested in talking to, Franklin Delano Roosevelt would probably be the one just because he dealt with the Great Depression and he dealt with a World War. And those circumstances were monumental, and I think they clearly have shaped our world. And to be able to have a half an hour chat with someone like that would have been extraordinary. Well, I think the most fun was probably David and Lost Boys, because it was just such a fun film to make, and as much as he was structured as the evil character or the counterbalance to Jason Patric's character, in the film he was cool and he was fun to play, and the film had a real rock and roll sensibility to it. And so for all of those reasons, that was a lot of fun to play. I was a huge fan of a show called The Wire. I felt that The Wire explained the urban American experience better than any single thing I'd ever read or watched before. And I was incredibly impressed with that show. Another show in kind of more of a pop culture way, I really enjoy Ray Donovan right now. Huge fan of The West Wing, and a huge fan of Newsroom. I was a big fan of ER. Television actually started to make a profound impression on me from a production standpoint going back to ER. And I've watched television steadily move in a positive direction, really since that point. Well, I think he'd have quite a lot to apologize for, and I think the theme of Flatliners, which I always loved, was that when they finally realized that they just had to acknowledge their past and make amends with their past. I think Jack Bauer would probably have a lot to make amends with. I think that was one of the through lines of the show. I think Jack Bauer would have a very unpleasant flatlining experience. My approach at acting, period, doesn't change from one medium to another. The physicalities do. So if I'm doing a play, the canvas is very big. It's 20 feet by 40 feet. If I'm doing a film, depending on the lens, it can be as small as 6 inches to 5 inches. And so you adjust your physicality and your voice and all of those parts of whatever that instrument is, your body, to that frame size. If I'm painting a very small painting, I'm very delicate with it. And if I'm painting a large painting, I get quite bombastic. you know. So voice work does not separate itself, for me at least, from any of the other mediums. I would never answer that question. I've been so fortunate through my whole career, men and women. I've had amazing partners as actors throughout my career. I consider myself to be one of the most fortunate actors I know in that regard. I'm trying to think of like films that I like, I don't really feel guilty about watching, you know. I mean, even something like Grease, I think if you take a look at the dance numbers and the kind of things that were in that movie, it was awesome. Saturday Night Fever, same thing. I think those were really, really well-made movies. If I was on a date, it probably wouldn't be the first movie I brought up, though, to say, you know, didn't you think that was cool? Yeah. I think Gene Hackman would have been an amazing partner for Jack Bauer to have. Depends who showed up. If it was a full dinner, pretty loud. Vanilla. It was amazing, you know, and that's a very simple answer. I mean, obviously it was very complicated. It was something that I'd wanted to do for 30 years. He also helped me define what kind of an actor I wanted to be in film. Just because you might have the lead role doesn't mean you can't approach it as a character or as a character actor. And I think Gene Hackman was one of those actors. I think Paul Newman became one of those actors. People that I really, really admired. So for 30 years I've been wanting to kind of work with this idol of mine. And then obviously there's personal issues between a father and a son that are going to come to play in this. I wanted that kind of experience as well. I am so glad that I actually pushed very hard to make that opportunity a reality. I'd be laying phone cable in Northern Ontario. I think one of the things for me that ended up working out, and I do not recommend it to anybody, but I left home at 15 to start work as an actor. And I think subconsciously I had put myself in a position by not finishing high school that if this didn't work out, I was in real trouble. And so for the times that I maybe wanted to quit, I knew I really didn't have another option. So I could work in a restaurant and I could do things like that. But with regards to my ultimate goal of what I wanted to do, I really had left myself no backup. And you know, again, I don't recommend it to anybody, and I got incredibly lucky. But I'd be in real trouble if this hadn't worked out. They're the same to me. And in all fairness, because I've never done a sitcom where they have an audience and they have the 3 cameras, we shot 24 exactly the same way I would shoot any other movie. The fantastic experience that I've had with television is that in one night, 20 million people will watch it. 20 million people watching your show is the equivalent of a $200 million movie. So if your goal is to tell a story and get it to people, my experience for me, television has worked out better. Probably hasn't even been born yet. There's so many. Again, you know, it's easier for me to tell you directors that I was so lucky to have worked with, from Daniel Petrie to Steven Spielberg to Rob Reiner to Joel Schumacher, John Cassar, who did almost all of 24 with me. I've been really fortunate that way. I know the right answer is PEAMEAL, but again, that depends on your mood. And the PEAMEAL to me is just more British. Personally, I like the strip bacon, but I know what the right answer would have been.
Very good.
Cheers.
Excellent.
Cheers.